All right, good morning anatomy. It's Monday. We are starting Unit 8 on muscles. This is part 1 of the notes. You will need to finish these and submit these by Monday evening at 11:59 p.m. So here we go. You will notice your learning targets are review the 3 types of muscle tissue and label and describe the connective tissue coverings around a muscle. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is an overview of muscle tissues. Our first one is skeletal muscle. And we go back to some of our medical terminology and we look at some prefixes. So for the word muscle, we have 2 prefixes that we're going to use. We are going to use the prefixes myo, and we're going to use it meese or mice. All right, and for the root word flesh, we're going to use the word sarco. Okay, now skeletal muscle, all right, it's multinucleated and it is striated. Now these are both terms that we used when we were in tissues and we did that brief over of the different types of muscular tissue. So meaning that we have visible bands or stripes and these cells are multinucleated. Most also important is they are under voluntary or conscious control. So when you're writing and moving your arms around, you are using skeletal muscle tissue. So let's talk about the connective tissue wrappings or coverings that are around a muscle, and they are called fascia. Okay, so the coverings, connecting tissue wrappings or coverings around are called fascia. So the first thing we want to talk about is the endomysium. All right, endo we know is going to mean inside. Endomysium, meese means muscle. And what that does is it covers each muscle fiber. Now, remember guys, muscle fiber is the term we use when we are describing a muscle cell. So individual muscle cells are called muscle fibers. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is a bundle of muscle fibers, and that is called a fascicle. Okay, a fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers. All right, covering each fascicle, we have what is known as the perimysium. Again, we want to remember that we're using our medical terminology, and we remember that the word peri means around. All right, the entire muscle is covered by the epimysium. Okay, and that's the entire muscle. And we remember that epi means on or above. Okay, now your epimysium, the outer connective tissue in the cover, blends into connecting muscle to bone, and we know that that's a tendon, and it's a cord-like tendon, which is classified, guys, as we will remember from tissues, as dense regular connective tissue, or it's sheet-like. Now this word was a bonus when we did tissues. You'll need to know the term for the muscular system, and it's called aponeurosis. Okay, and that means the muscles attach indirectly. It's sheet-like. Okay, so that's with that. So let's take a look then, and we're going to do some labeling here together, and then you're going to do some more labeling for me later on. So this individual, I've got to find it right here. This is what I'm looking for. This right here is a muscle fiber, meaning it's an individual muscle cell. Okay, now the covering around this here is called the endomysium. Now, this entire entity right here is known as a fascicle. Remembering, a fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers, and therefore the covering around that is called the perimysium. All right. Now, the covering around all of this is called the epimysium. Because this is your muscle tissue. Obviously, this is bone. And then here we have that cord-like tendon that connects muscle to bone. All right, so let's go to our next section, and we have a new learning target here, muscle functions. We're going to explain the functions of the muscular system. All right, so the first function is to produce movement. Now, another word for movement, guys, is locomotion. So skeletal muscles are responsible for movement or locomotion. And that's either movement of the skeleton itself or your facial expressions. All right, now, smooth muscle tissue and cardiac muscle tissue work together to circulate blood and maintain blood pressure. And we said that you have smooth muscles of hollow organs, force food, fluids, and a baby through body channels. So we've got skeletal muscles, and then we have the smooth muscle vessels and cardiac muscle of the heart. Both of these help circulate blood and maintain blood pressure, and that would be cardiac muscle tissue. And then you have smooth muscle tissue, which in your stomach, in your intestines, and obviously in the walls of the uterus, help forcing things through body channels. Now, the second function is to maintain posture. Skeletal muscles work continuously to maintain it either a seated or standing posture despite the downward pull of gravity. Gravity always pulls everything down, so therefore your muscles are working constantly against that, either where you're seated or standing. All right, so our third function is to stabilize joints, and we just finished talking about joints and joint movements. So the third function is to stabilize joints. The function is to stabilize and reinforce joints, some of which have poorly fitting articular surfaces. So think about those where you can have, such as in the surfaces around the knee and other things. So this would be helping the stabilization process. All right, and then the fourth one is going to be to generate heat. Heat is a byproduct of muscle contraction, but it's not very efficient. 3/4 or 75% of the energy from ATP escapes as heat. So this is very, very inefficient. Okay. Heat is necessary for homeostasis. All of those metabolic processes need heat to drive. So it also means that you need to maintain body temperature. So we're going to put a star again on this as a very important function because of the whole whoops, let's not do that. Let's highlight that. That's very important. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is go into the microscopic anatomy of a skeletal muscle. And so our learning target is to explain and label the microscopic anatomy of a skeletal muscle. All right, so we've already talked about how muscle cells are called muscle fibers. We've already made that leap there to talk about that. So that's going to be our first thing moving forward here as I'm trying to move through this. So we've got muscle fibers. Whoops, I did it again. All right, muscle fibers. All right, because of their structure. All right, they're linked and parallel, wrapped in bundles. And so in this case, we're talking about skeletal muscles. That was one of the characteristics of skeletal muscles. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is the plasma membrane, except it has a special name. So we go back to that term sarc, which means flesh. So the specialized plasma membrane of a muscle fiber is called a sarcolemma. All right, now, you have these fibers, thin fibers within them that we're talking about the different parts of a skeletal muscle. And so you have what's known as a myofibril. They are long organelles inside the muscle cell. And then you have the contractile unit. They're broken up into individual units. And we call that the sarcomere. That is the contractile unit of a myofibril. Now, sarcomeres are made up of two myofilaments, and these myofilaments are these thread-like proteins. So the term we're looking for here is myofilaments, or muscle filaments, since myo means muscle. And you have two types. You have thin filaments and you have thick filaments. Actin is your thin filament, and myosin is your thick filament. All right, now, we had a special name for the plasma membrane called the sarcolemma. Now, we have a special name for the endoplasmic reticulum because remember, we're talking about a muscle cell, a muscle fiber here, so they have the same organelles that a normal cell has, except in this case, they have specialized names. So the specialized smooth endoplasmic reticulum is referred to as sarcoplasmic reticulum. All right, and we said it was specialized smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Its function is it surrounds each myofibril, and then it stores and releases calcium. Okay. Whoops. My spelling is horrible today. Calcium. And I'm going to highlight this in a different color because, guys, this is huge. Calcium is needed for muscle contractions. If you don't have calcium, you don't get muscle contractions. And so you may see the chemical symbol calcium like that. All right. Let's take a look right here. I'm going to kind of give you a little infographic and break this down for you. You have a muscle fiber, then is composed of myofibrils, which are made of myofilaments, of which there are two. You have a thin called actin, and you have a thick filament called myosin. All right? So now we're going to take a look and we're going to do some labeling here from some skeletal muscle structure here. So let's take a look at this labeling. All right, so we're looking here at starting here and going this way. We have our muscle. Again, we have bundles called fascicles. We have muscle fibers, which we know are our cells. Specialized terminology, though. Myofibrils. And then we have thick and thin filaments. All right, so let's go from the top labeling down. Obviously, we have our bone. Then we have our cord-like tendon. We have the fascia, which actually covers the muscle. And then on the outside right here, we have what's known as the epimysium. if I can make this just a little bit bigger, guys. And then you can see surrounding each of the fascicles, you have the perimycelium. And you can see that there, and it's also showing here as well. All right, again, you also have then surrounding each individual bundle, you've got, as I said, that was the perimycelium. Now you've got the endomycelium. And you can see that surrounding there and that surrounding these. Okay? Now, this entire entity here is the fascicle. All right, and then you can see this would be as part of the nervous system, guys. This is the axon of a motor neuron, and the nervous system is very important for stimulating the nerves, the nerve stimulating the muscle fibers to produce movement. All right, so, and we also have to have blood vessels so that nutrients and oxygen can get to the muscle fibers and nourish. So this entire bundle right here is a muscle fiber. All right, and then right below that is going to be the plasma membrane that surrounds the muscle fiber, which we refer to as the sarcolemma. All right, now, moving over here as we go deeper into the cell, you will see several nuclei here, but in this case, this is the nucleus. This is a skeletal nucleus, and they are multinucleated. Now, you can see this endoplasmic reticulum, which we refer to as the sarcoplasmic reticulum. All right, now we get here to this unit of part of the muscle fiber being the myofibril. And then you have your myofilaments in this case. And these are the thin, which would be actin, and the thick, which would be myosin. All right, so there's the microanatomy of a skeletal muscle. Okay, so let's move forward. Now, we're going to go here, and we are looking at what is known as a segment of a muscle fiber. So this entire thing right here is a segment of a muscle fiber. All right, and you can see the multiple nuclei. This is a nucleus here, and there's another nucleus there. All right, so surrounding this right here, surrounding that is the plasma membrane known as the sarcolemma. All right, so what we're pulling out, guys, here is a myofibril. All right, so I'm pulling out this section of a myofibril. All right, now what I'm looking at next is my thin filament, which is in the blue right here, which is actin, and I'm going to write thin next to it. And then in red, you're looking at myosin, which is your thick filament. Okay, those are your myofilaments. Now, you have different things here, guys, that we're going to label, and we'll talk a little bit about them later on. But this area right here is called the H zone. This area is called the Z disc or Z band. Okay, now, what I have right here, guys, this is the, as I said right here, this is the muscle fiber. That's a segment of it. Right here is part of the myofibril. This section, what we're looking at right here. Now we're going to go further down and dissect this section, and we're going to be in the sarcomere, which we said was the contractile unit. Okay, so I've got my thin filament, which is actin, and my thick filament, which is myosin. So here's actin, and here's myosin. Okay, actin is the blue, and myosin is the thick in the red. All right, and this, as we said, this whole thing is referred to as a sarcomere. All right. Again, this is a sarcomere, the contractile units. All right, now, we talk about these. These are myosin heads, and that'll be important when we start talking about the contractile. And this area right here is known as the M line. All right, and I think that's going to get us it for right now as far as labeling here. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to describe the steps of a muscle contraction. All right, so first you've got to have neurons to stimulate the skeletal muscle fibers. They've got to be stimulated by a nerve impulse. So in order to contract, skeletal muscles must be stimulated by a nerve impulse. All right, so we want to talk about some specialized terminology here. So the first thing we want to talk about is a motor unit. A motor unit is one neuron and all of the skeletal muscle cells it stimulates. Now, where the neuron meets a muscle cell is referred to as a neuromuscular junction. All right, that makes sense. We're saying that's where a neuron or a nerve actually meets the muscle cell. Now, it doesn't actually touch it. It kind of hovers over it, and you have what's known as a gap there, and that gap is called the synaptic cleft. Okay, it's a gap between the neuron and a muscle cell, and it can also be referred to by another name known as a synapse. All right, so let's take a look at this. Here is my neuron. This is my nerve. Remember, a neuron is a nerve cell. Okay, now this area right here, where all of these neurons meet this muscle cell, that's called, what we're looking at right here is your neuromuscular junction. Now, this entire unit here is called a motor unit. That's the one nerve and all of the muscle cells that it innervates. Now, we've got several things that are happening here when we take a look at this, of what's actually happening. And so we're going to talk about the steps in muscle contraction. So you've got an action potential that comes down that axon of a neuron, and it triggers the release of a neurotransmitter. Now, a neurotransmitter, guys, is a chemical signal. All right, you've got a chemical signal, and this one is called acetylcholine. All right, so when you're looking at this area right here, whoops, let me get out of this. take that back. Come on. All right, it's this area right here, guys. It's this gap area right here that we're calling the synaptic cleft. All right? All right. Anyway, you've got an electrical signal. That action potential is an electrical signal to the muscle fiber. All right, and so this area right here, guys, when you're looking at this area right here, this is a sarcomere. This area to right here is a sarcomere. That is one contractile unit of a muscle fiber. Okay? Now, the action potential travels along the sarcolemma, which is the plasma membrane. Okay, so we'll kind of just write a note that that's our plasma membrane. And inside the muscle fiber down to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's there that the sarcoplasmic reticulum releases calcium. Okay? And you can see that happening here. These are your neurotransmitters. You can see how you've got, like, here's mitochondria. Guys, we'll look at this right here. Here's mitochondria because you have to have energy for this in the form of ATP, and cellular respiration goes on in the mitochondria. You've got your calcium and you've got your acetylcholine that's being released. Okay, so this would be your acetylcholine right here. That's your neurotransmitter. Right, that's everything that gets started. And then you have calcium. All right, now, your calcium ions trigger the binding of myosin to actin. And you have what's known as cross-bridge cycling. And that is the sliding of actin across myosin, which causes the muscle to shorten and thicken, which ultimately is going to cause movement. All right? Now, so we take a look at this. You've got an electrical impulse. You've got a action potential. The brain has sent a message down the nerves to the muscle that you need to move. Okay, so it triggers the release of a neurotransmitter. That's a chemical message. It's a signal, and the chemical messenger that we're going to talk about here, the neurotransmitter, is acetylcholine. That goes into the synaptic cleft, and that causes an action potential in the muscle fiber. Now, that action potential goes around the plasma membrane, the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber, down into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Its function is to release calcium. If you don't have calcium, you don't get the action potential and you don't get movement. So that's why calcium is so very important. All right, so let's take a look at our next diagram. Why is calcium important? All right, so here is our myosin cross bridge right here. It attaches to the actin filament. Okay, here's the head of the myosin right here. All right, that's right there. And it attaches, actin attaching to myosin. All right, now, at this point, you have what's known as a working stroke. All right, the myosin head is going to pivot and bend, pulling on the actin filament, and then it slides toward that M line that we talked about. Now, you're using energy here, so you've got ATP. It attaches to the myosin head, and that's going to cause the cross bridge to detach. All right, and then you've got multiple myosin heads with this happening. At this point, after you've used energy, you remember you use ATP, it splits into ADP and phosphate. And then the myosin head recocks so that it can attach again so that this cycles through. So you've got this entire cycle going through. Now, guys, in your folder, there's a little video that's attached that actually explains this procedure going through that. So I want you to watch that couple of minute video, and it's going to show you how the multiple myosin heads attach to actin and how you've got this. It's kind of like a mousetrap, how you cock a mousetrap and then the trap is triggered and it throws it forward, and then you have to recock the mousetrap again using energy. The same thing happens with these myosin heads binding to actin. All right? Now, what I want you guys to do right here is you're going to read through this. You're going to watch that video, and then you need to summarize this. Summarize in your own words the muscle contraction steps, okay? So that's what 1, 2, 3, and 4 are for you to do, is to summarize. Whoa, that's too, that doesn't work there. We're not going to do that there. Come on, undo. Summarize in your own words, okay? Now, moving forward, we've got to talk about the energy that we need for this. We need to explain the process for producing ATP. All right, so we have adenosine triphosphate. Which is ATP. And that's needed to power the contraction. All right. But unfortunately, you only have a few seconds worth of ATP stored in your muscles. After that time, you've got to have other pathways to produce the ATP. So one of the first pathways you have is called creatine phosphate. Or CP. This is a very high energy molecule. And so CP interacts with ADP to create one ATP molecule. Unfortunately, your creatine phosphate supplies are exhausted in less than 15 seconds. So what happens is creatine phosphate plus ADP. Okay, so it donates its phosphate group to ADP, which is going to yield ATP. So you got about 15 seconds of that. After that, we get into where the lion's share of the ATP is going to come from, and that's going to be from aerobic cellular respiration, or cellular respiration in the presence of oxygen. All right. Here you have glucose, or as we know the chemical formula, C6H12O6, is broken down into carbon dioxide and water. Those are and it then releases energy. You get multiple ATP, 36 ATP per one glucose molecule. All right, so that's 36 ATP per one glucose molecule. All right, so you've got, the formula is C6H12O6 plus O2 yields ATP, energy, and waste products of carbon dioxide plus water. Now, this is not the balanced chemical formula. This is just the basic chemical formula. But you've got to have a continuous supply of oxygen, or O2. That's aerobic cellular respiration. Now, after you have used up all your oxygen, so think you're running a marathon or something like that, and you're short on oxygen supplies, you have what's known as anaerobic respiration and lactic acid formation. All right, now this reaction breaks down glucose without oxygen, okay? In this case, oxygen delivery maybe is impaired due to bulging muscles, compressing blood vessels during vigorous exercise, okay? You've been doing CrossFit, you're running a marathon, whatever. This is going to give you 2 ATP per one glucose molecule. Now, the byproduct of this is lactic acid, which promotes muscle fatigue and soreness. Now, At this point, guys, your body is running what's known as an oxygen debt. But here's the thing, your body, unlike the federal government, cannot run a deficit. So that debt has to be repaid. So you see all these people who've exercised, who've run a marathon and everything, what they want to do is collapse on the ground or whatever, and people tell them, no, you need to walk it off. You got to walk it off, and you got to breathe deeply. So what you're doing is resupplying your body with oxygen to replace this oxygen debt. Okay? And so those guys are the three sources of extra ATP as energy for muscle contractions. All right, so finish these notes by 11:59 on Monday and submit them for a grade. In class on Tuesday and Wednesday, we will review the notes together in class because you will already have done them, and then we will work on a labeling assignment which will be due in class that day, either on Tuesday or Wednesday. All right, see you guys later. Bye.